My name is Chad Stotler. I'm the local history librarian at Westlake Porter Public Library in Westlake, Ohio, a western suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. Today is December 9th, 2017, and we're conducting this interview at the Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish in South Euclid, Ohio. It is my pleasure to be interviewing today Lawrence M. Jelinek. So if you could start off by telling me where were your parents born?
My parents were both born, my father in Cleveland, Ohio, my mother in Clarion, Pennsylvania.
And what were their occupations?
My father spent his life working in the steel mill, and my mother was a professional seamstress.
And if you have any siblings, who were they? Their names, and did any of them serve in the military?
My only brother's name was Vladimir J. Jelinek. He was killed in an industrial accident at the age of 24, and he did not serve in the military.
So now we'll begin talking about the early days of your service. What were you doing before you entered the military?
I actually entered the military just less than 4 months after I graduated from high school. So I was working for the city of Parma at that time as a maintenance worker, and till the summer ran out, and then shortly thereafter I went into the military.
In what branch of the military did you serve?
The United States Marine Corps.
And were you enlisted, or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
You enlisted. And why did you choose to enlist rather than waiting for the draft?
Well, that was when they just started the draft lottery, and my number was rather a low number, so I assumed I was probably going to be drafted anyway, so I started it earlier than I would have been drafted.
And what year was this?
In 1968.
And since you enlisted, why did you choose the Marines over another branch?
Well, I was just looked into it somewhat, but I was influenced by other people. My neighbor had gone in, and some of the gentlemen I worked with were former Marines and that. And I went in enlisted as an aviation guarantee, which means I was going to be in something to do with the air wing of the Marine Corps. And I thought possibly it may lead to future career opportunities in that after I got out.
And what happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training? If you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I went in 2 days after my 18th birthday. I went to Parris Island, South Carolina. Boot camp is approximately about 14 weeks at that time. Had 2 weeks of general staging and then actual 12 weeks of training. Went through that, and then at the end of boot camp you're assigned your military occupational specialty, mine of which was I was a maintenance control administration. What we did was do scheduled maintenances for the aircraft, schedule them, this and that, and repair work and everything like that. I was in the administrative end of that. We would assign work orders to it and everything else.
Do you recall any of your drill instructors? If so, what were they like?
They were very difficult, very demanding, and yes, I never forget one of them until the day I die.
Could you talk a little bit more about them? I guess, what was it like for them running the training, or?
Well, obviously they demanded the utmost of respect. They were, they pushed, they motivated. Every night one of them would be with you, and they would be with you from the moment you woke till the moment you closed your eyes. And so they were constant. There were 3 of them in our platoon, rather, a head and 2 assistants, and all three would be there during each day other than their days off. They would flip-flop, and then, but like I said, all through the night, morning, noon, night. They would.
Do you know if any of them were combat veterans themselves?
Yeah, all of them.
All of them were?
All of them were. All of them were decorated veterans.
Did you receive any specialized training? If so, what was that training?
The training was once I got into what my field was going to be in the aircraft maintenance control. We went through a couple weeks of general aviation instruction, and then my classwork for a couple of months in training in my actual specific position.
Okay. How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, and social life?
I believe I adapted well. I knew it was going to be difficult, not nearly as difficult as it was, but I knew it was coming. I didn't think, the social life didn't bother me. There was none. Anything like that. I obviously I missed home somewhat. It was my first time actually totally being away from my family and friends and everything else. So there's quite an adjustment, but we made it through it.
What was it like living sort of in a community with a bunch of people? I assume you're probably thrown together with guys from all over the country. And
well, it was different. I actually, we met people from the South, black and whites. Everybody we were one, and there's people that come in the military that couldn't read and write at the time. So there's a lot of different backgrounds, everything you can think of, and but it was communication with the other people that were going through with me was very difficult because it was very disciplined. You spoke when you were spoken to, so it was highly disciplined, so there wasn't a lot of socializing or really getting to know people.
What about the food?
The food tasted kind of like hospital food. It was bland, but you were working so hard all day long. Everything tasted good when you got to it. So.
Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about the wartime service. Where did you serve?
Okay. In December of 1969, I was sent to the Republic of Vietnam, and in my time before I left, I was involved doing my job in Santa Ana, California, with a helicopter squadron. And so when I was sent overseas, I was assigned to a helicopter squadron over there. It was a Huey helicopter squadron. The planes served several missions over there, resupply, basically gun cover for other helicopters that were picking up wounded, resupply missions, some reconnaissance. And so I was assigned to the Huey helicopter squadron, and then after I was there a short time, I was working my regular job. You work a regular 10 to 12 hour shift and that, getting all that stuff. But they asked me if I would be willing to fly in a helicopter, and I said yes, I would. And from that moment on, I was a helicopter aerial door gunner.
What part of Vietnam was this at?
Where we were at a base called Marble Mountain, which was just outside of Da Nang, located right on the South China Sea, right on the edge of the water.
Okay. So what are some of the memories you have of serving in Vietnam?
Well, I have all kinds of memories, but once again, you found, once you get into a combat zone, a lot of the things you needed to learn or that you maybe question, why did we learn? Now you know why. We once I began flying, I still worked my regular job, so I flew. We would get up 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and usually fly right at sunrise, and that would last most of the day, and then I'd come home refreshing up, and then go work at my job in the hangar until about 11 midnight or so, and then go back and do it. And it's 7 days a week. You don't know whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Sunday. So the time, that helps the time go past. And then, plus, once again, with all the different backgrounds of everybody you serve with and that, you start at this time, you have more time to get to know people. You live with them, you sleep with them, you eat with them, and that, and a lot of variables on how you're living. It's totally different than what you've ever been used to in your life.
Were you in basically tents at that point, or were they sort of erected structures like huts for you?
They were structured huts. They slept usually 4 double beds or 8 people. Somebody would go out, somebody would move in. We had bunker in between the hut in front of us and the hut in the back of us. The showers in the bathroom were both down the street. So there was no running water or anything like that. We did have electricity. Yeah, that was our living quarters.
So the Marble Mountain, was that how close was that to, I guess, I don't want to say the front lines, but how close was that to, how far did you have to fly?
Vietnam, there was no front line, okay? There's can be trouble everywhere. But we were fenced in, we were guarded and fenced in. Only once or twice, a few times there was attempts at going over the wire of people trying to get in. Our biggest, we would get hit with mortars and rocket fire from usually inland, and they would come in, they would land mostly during the night. They were really trying to hit the helicopters on the revetment pads outside the hangars and that, and so it would usually be pretty quick hit, boom, 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 and then the sirens would go off, and they would try, wherever they came from, they would try to locate that, which sometimes they would have luck, sometimes they wouldn't, but they would go out. That was the troops that guarded around our borders would spend time searching out those places or that, but they were kind of mobile, so they would move around from one time to the next. Where they fired from, you wouldn't find the next day.
So I know this question says, if you're on the front lines, what were your duties? But I guess as a helicopter door gunner, what were you expected to do?
That was I was on one side of the plane. Our crews were 4 people: pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, and door gunner. And I was on the left side of the plane behind the co-pilot. He was my responsibility in case of emergency to get him in and out, and also cover that side of the plane, and the crew chief and the pilot the same on the other side. Like I said, our missions varied very much from resupply, medevac situations and that. We were a gunship. We had 4 were firing rockets, 4 were firing machine guns, and then my gun and the crew chief's gun. And we provided cover for the helicopter that was actually going in to drop the supplies or to pick up the wounded. Then we also had ones that were called the dirty slick. They didn't have the mounted armament on them. They were just, the crew chief and I were the only 2 guns on it. And that was more for reconnaissance and certain different kinds of missions that we would run. And we'd be in those types of situations. We were normally extremely low to the ground. And like I said, it's reconning an area and that, and those were a lot of in and outs, but very eye to eye, very close to the ground.
Like how close, like 20, 30 feet?
Yes.
Did you ever do any infantry duty while you were in Vietnam?
No, I was strictly in the Army.
So, how did you feel when witnessing casualties and destruction out there in the field? What sort of thoughts went through your head at that time?
Well, I came to see and know things that you saw things on TV, you see movies, you see everything else, but like anything else in real life, it's much, much different. You knew it was out there, but you didn't know what it was until you saw it.
So what kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and with whom?
A gentleman that was my roommate in the hut in Vietnam, his name was Mike Falkenberg. He was from the Washington, D.C. area. He actually came in and was in a wedding party the day I got married. We had a very good relationship. We spent a lot of time together. We ate together. He was in administration. He never flew or that, but we had a lot in common, and we would work out together and that in our street, and a little bit of free time we had and that, but he's a real good guy. And another guy I used to go to church with, his name was Anthony Canzaneri. He's a Pennsylvania guy. And he was a Catholic, and so was I, and he really started getting me to try and go to church more than that. But like I said, oftentimes Sunday is, you don't even know it exists. We would go when we could. Mass was in a tent and this and that. But there's a lot of relationships, good and bad, and a lot of memories.
What were the relationships like with the officers? Was it as strict as it was in boot camp, or was it more
when you were flying and everything else? A lot of the pilots were young lieutenants out of officer school and flight training and that. So they were almost peer like in that. And our commanding officer, other officers and that were up the ladder, majors, colonels, lieutenant colonels, and they would have to fly so much to get their airtime in. They had to do so many hours per month of that. But as far as we had a working relationship with the pilots. I mean, they depended on us, we depended on them, and so it wasn't so strict as it is stateside.
So the pilots really were probably not much older than you were at that time.
No, I was, for me being awfully young, yeah, but they were most of them in their probably mid-20s.
Also like college graduates.
College, and they went to officer training after college, and I basically was just out of high school.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home while serving in Vietnam?
Mail, I made maybe 3 phone calls home in the 13 months. So a call was placed through an overseas radio operator and that, and so it was a two-way radio. So he would, I'd have to say, "Hi, Mom, how are you? Over." And then she would say, "Everybody's good here. How are you? Over." And so it was, it wasn't a lot. But I called about 3 times. And that in the mail, and that's it.
How often would you write letters home?
Just about daily. Just about daily. My girlfriend at the time, who was not my wife, and my parents.
What sort of things
would you talk about in the letters, as opposed to, would you talk about what you were experiencing, or is it just more general?
Never whatsoever. Really pretty much advice. As a matter of fact, my family, no one knew that I was flying until I was done flying, just to save the worry and that. And yeah, nothing about that, just food, weather, everything, just general stuff. We were restricted as far as what we could talk about too.
Well, what was the weather like for you over there? Or what do you remember most about it?
See, there was flying was very different. You could go up into the mountains and you'd have a flight jacket on and everything else because it's very cold, your cloud level and this. And then you come down on the flight line and go to refuel, and that's 110 degrees on a flight line. So and then the monsoon season, which is in October, and that, well, it rained 30 out of 31 days in October, the month of October that I was there. So that's the weather. That's jungle weather.
And you're probably like living in mud by that point.
Oh yeah.
Mud everywhere.
And then once again, being right on the edge of the South China Sea, we had a typhoon one time. That was pretty bad. It could have been much worse. We had to move planes. We had to tie things down, tie down the bathrooms outside, everything else. But it was a little bit of experience there too.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Like I said, it was a little limited. We had an enlisted man's club. They had bands that would come in maybe once a month or something like that. They would do a little show, like they were mostly like Filipino bands or stuff like that. Some of them, and you would drink beer there, and then, like I said, my friend Mike and I, we used to play one-on-one basketball or lift a little bit, or we actually had a little recreation center that had a steam room in it too. I didn't use it too much because I got enough steam during the day. But,
what about trips to either other parts of Vietnam or Japan or?
I went on an R&R to Taipei, Taiwan. That was my rest and recuperation. I also went to the Philippines once for a couple days at survival school. It was a quick 2-day class on if you're crashing, you're in the jungle, and how do you survive the best in this and that. With teaches a lot of makeshift stuff and that, and of how you could survive if you were down there alone.
Was this stuff that you kind of already knew, or was this
just an emphasis and more design? All of our basic infantry training that every Marine goes through, and that was right after boot camp. Everything was based on jungle warfare and that, as it was, because of the time.
So where were you stationed when where were you when your time in Vietnam ended? Were you still with the same group at Marble Mountain, or had you...
Yes, I never moved the whole time I was there.
Okay. And this is what, by 1969 or 70?
71, January 71. Okay. I left in December of 69 and came home in January 71.
Okay. How did you return home? Was it by air?
Yes,
or
yeah. As a matter of fact, it's quite a long flight. All of my personal belongings and that were in a staging place in Okinawa. That's where you stop on the way over. And then we were there for about a day and a half, got our stuff, got our clothes cleaned and everything else, so we could. And then went on we had a direct flight from Okinawa to Oakland, California. And then Oakland to San Bernardino, I think it was. Very, very short flight, but they have to stop and refuel because of all the way from Okinawa. When you take off from Okinawa, the jet clears the fence at the end of the runway, And now it's American Airlines, it's a domestic air carrier. But for the first hour or so, you're flying right above the water just to burn up the excess fuel so you can then take off and get up into the clouds and that. So, but it was about a 13-hour flight, so it's pretty long.
I would imagine it would be. How were you received by your family and community at home once you got back to Cleveland?
Well, those times were very different now, and we weren't. I don't believe we received the respect we were looked down upon almost. Not by my family, of course, but just by the general public, and that you were considered a warmonger or this or that. It was during the peace, love generation, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and we were looked at a very different light than that. And I was pretty selective about who I was friends with in that. Most of my friends were the people that were friends before I went into the military. It was a different world out there, the people you would meet when you came back.
Did anybody ever say anything to you or confront you, or was it just more of a general feeling?
Just a general feeling, yeah. I would say there was no lack of respect, thanks, anything else towards what you've been through. You know, like we were the cause of what we were doing versus trying to help the situation.
Right. Did you feel like after you tried to sort of shed your military image, like, you know, let your hair grow, or just sort of the clothing, or did you sort of keep that? I don't want to say keep that up, but
I would no. Yeah, I got much more when I actually got out. I got much more relaxed, but you know, a little hair length and this and that, but not. I never got into at that, like I say, the hippie, the peace, love, drugs scene or that wasn't me.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
I got working, and I went right to work. It just, like I said, pretty much like the life I had before. I started to try and be professional, just advance in my years. I probably should have gone right into school at that time to take advantage of my GI Bill and that. I didn't. I did later on, but I wanted to work. I had to make a living, and that. I was still living with my parents and everything else, but. And I got my recreation. I got into playing a lot of softball, and that was my recreation: softball and bowling in the winter, and softball in the summer, and that. But,
did you go back to work for Parma, or did you?
No. I totally. My first job was I was a retail manager of a lease department in a discount store, and was actually in the shoe business, and that which led to my next career with a family business, a family-owned business that I really had a nice time with for 6 years, and that grew me up a little bit, and that it was took off the rough edges because I worked in Pepper Pike with a lot of professional people and that. So,
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with any fellow veterans? If so, who?
My friend Dave Rush, who actually grew up in Parma with me, and we met. Well, we knew each other prior to going over, and then we both went in. He was in a little while before me. He was actually a year older than I was. We met. He was flying in a helicopter that was picking up wounded, and we were his gun cover. And we used to sit in a bunker. read magazines, and would do whatever until the call came and we were running out to our helicopters. And he said, "John," I looked and I said, "Dave." And he said, "Don't get shot because we got a lot to talk about." And we came back, and he's a friend of mine. He still lives on the west side. See him maybe once a year or so. We have a Marine Corps birthday reunion. And also another friend of mine, I met two guys. We were in the stands at Camp Pendleton before, staging battalion, before he went overseas. We were waiting to get shots, and two guys sitting behind me, and they were talking, and they mentioned a word, the infamous Roxy Burlesque that was in downtown Cleveland at the time. I turned around and I said, "Where are you guys from?" And they said, "It's Cleveland." And then we got to talk. Well, that gentleman still, those two gentlemen are still my friends now, that I see off. In fact, I'll see one tomorrow.
Oh, small world, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the Roxy was the magic word.
Oh. That was a burlesque theater?
It was a burlesque theater.
Where was that located at?
9th and St. Vincent, downtown. Very famous, and you're too young to remember.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
The Disabled American Veterans, and I had belonged to the VFW. I don't now, and I'm thinking about rejoining it again. But it's there's one in my home now and that.
So how would you say your wartime experiences affected your life?
Well, obviously, I had to grow up at a very young age. You find out the real world out there, and like I said, stuff you only saw in movies and things like that. So the Marine Corps in general helped me to grow up. There was a old saying, because I had no direction when I got out of high school, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And there was a saying, born in Cleveland, raised at Paris Island, grew up in Vietnam. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I would say it affects me every day of my life.
What are some of the life lessons you learned from your military service?
Once again, the responsibility. You learn responsibility to and for others, because you're always responsible for the person next to you. And that. Respect. There's a lot of honor, respect for other veterans, experienced people. You know, you can learn something every day.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, one, I support the military 1,001%. And if war is, I believe war is a necessary evil sometimes. It's for the protection of others. And as a country, we're found the ones to be responsible for everybody else. But if that's the way it is, so be it. But if we can protect people, that's our job.
And then finally, what message would you like to leave for any future generations who may hear or view this interview in the future?
Well, I would just say that the military was a very beneficial, purposeful portion of my life. And like I said, from the day I got off that bus in Paris Island till we sit here today, there's something that in the way I act or in the way I feel about other people or this or that was affected by that experience.
And is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed or that you'd like to add to this interview from any of the other previous parts?
No, I really think we covered a lot. I mean, there's we asked, here packing a few years of experiences into a short period of time here, but if my thing I would pass on to anybody is, if you know a veteran, if they've been a combat veteran, to be understanding towards them, let them know that what they did was to protect you, I, and everyone else. And so it's, respect their commitment.
All right, so once again, this is Chad Stotler with the Westlake Porter Public Library interviewing Lawrence Jelinek. Larry, I'd like to thank you for your time.
My pleasure.